Alright, it's Professor Ballenger again, Intro to Meditation, and this is a little short bit on taking your seat. When you do go to meditate, it's very important to sit up as best you can and as comfortably as you can. If you take a seat where your back is rounded and your knees are raised, just to sit cross-legged, like you may have seen in some sort of a yoga class, yet your body is really uncomfortable, all of that discomfort is going to be a distraction to your meditation. And we'd like for that meditation to be something of a sanctuary, where your mind can begin to do whatever work that it needs to. So if we clutter that with body aches and pains, this is going to make things difficult. So just about the most important part, kind of weird to have one of these sitting around with you, is that when you do take your seat, your spinal column is as upright as you can get it, preferably perfectly upright with a nice little cervical curve and a nice little lumbar curve. To do this sitting exactly on the floor with your legs crossed is really difficult to do. And especially even if you could do it, it'd be very difficult for you to do without actually having to use some muscles to hold you there. So this is why we're going to use some props. Now, if you have a super nice, very lavish, fairly expensive meditation chair that's kind of built with a wide end so that your knees can splay out to the sides, built with a little bit of a slope and a narrow back for support, fantastic. But this is very unnecessary. This is probably one of the more popular things. You can find these at all sorts of different places. Sometimes they're called zafus, I believe. And they're usually filled with some sort of cushy item so that you can form it to your bottom or your rear end easily. The idea is that if you can raise your hips up higher, this takes a lot of strain out of the muscles in the front of your hips and waistline. So when you do go to sit, your legs can essentially relax more down and open, and your spine can be more tall and erect. The more tension you have in the front of your hips, and we oftentimes call these your hip flexors, the tougher it is for your low back to be vertical and erect. So barring going to a class or a stretch course or a yoga class, your props can help a ton. And personally, been doing the yoga stuff for a long time, I'm fairly limber, and I absolutely prefer to use something like one of these. So if I was going to use one of these, I would probably sit cross-legged, put my sit bones right on there, wiggle around until that felt level, and instead of having my knees lifted, I would hope that I could put my feet more top down and let my knees come down. If my knees were still elevated, I would want to figure out if my knees were much higher than my hips, most likely my back's going to round. So if that's the case, I'd want to raise this up even higher. And I could use another cushion. I'd probably put the zafu on top of that, and then see if that was high enough to let the knees finally release. Now, the knees releasing, that's a descriptive term that we've been using to just kind of say that's one of our goals. But really the more important thing is if I raise this up, does my low back sit vertical with a little bit of a curve? So if that's the case, even if my low back is up and my knees aren't all the way down on the ground, but they're lower, and my back is with easy upright posture, I could use something like a yoga block and put something underneath my knee, and I could use something, anything around the house. These are some small cushions that I found at IKEA, and they were super cheap, so I actually bought multiples of them, and you can unzip them. So I put 2 or 3 of the pads inside the holder thing, whatever you call that, and made this really sturdy. So I could use that. If your knees are just dangling in space, it's probably going to put some stress in the hip flexors, and then eventually into your low back. So that's one of the ways to prop it. Keep bringing your hips up until your low back is upright, and then if your knees are kind of dangling and it seems like that's pulling or even stretching, which you don't really want to have happen while you're meditating, use something to hold up your knees and support them. Now there are some other really common things that you might be able to find, and this this was a present from my wife, and it was not very expensive at all, and I was just flabbergasted at how comfortable it was. This is a little bit more. I think she bought this at at more of a Buddhist meditation place, and just fantastic. This, you're meant to sit as if your knees were going to be going straight ahead. Then you take this and you put it right over your shins or ankles. And usually the bottom of the two sides that are into the floor have a little bit of a round, so you can get right to the tip where your pelvis has just the right tip that your lumbar goes in and up, which is super important. That lumbar needs to be easily upright. And because you're sitting on the wood, and the wood has these two legs on it, all of your body weight of your torso goes down into the bench and then down through the legs into the floor. So, as soon as I've done that, I've taken my body mass out of my legs and out of my knees. And I have a pretty healthy body. I can sit on my heels, I can sit on the floor. But if I don't have any support for the torso and all of my body mass goes through my legs, eventually how much my knees open starts to become a little bit of an issue, or my body weight pressing down into my calves, or if my hips were all the way down on the floor, because I'm a little bit limber, eventually I have to do more work in my hips and pelvis to actually create this little rock and this tilt. So I think these things are, they range in price. If you're a real keen do-it-yourself person, I think you could even make one on your own. This one's made out of bamboo. It's light, it's very, very durable, really strong little hinges in there, and I don't think this was very expensive at all, probably in the $20 to $40 range, and just a fantastic tool. If you're a yoga person, these yoga blocks are fantastic and completely underused. So if I wanted to sit like this, which is, in my belief, it's probably even better than sitting with your legs crossed. Whenever you cross the legs and fold the feet in, one leg tends to tip a little bit higher or rotate different than the other. So that hip and that side of your pelvis and sacrum tips, does a little corkscrewing. So as I get older and older and I've sat for longer and longer, I think that sitting with your legs more parallel is better and better. I love my wonderful chair and I love to sit like that. I've done it for so long that it feels comfortable, but I have to admit, knees going forward, more parallel, makes it easier for the spine to be upright. So if you like this little yoga block, you can just take that, slide it right back in between your legs, and put it right underneath the perineum, and maybe you can get both of your sit bones on it. And it's a little bit like the bench. More of your body mass is going to be down into that yoga block now, instead of being all the way through your legs. It doesn't offer you the easy tip and tilt, but it sure is economical. You can get these blocks for almost nothing all over the place now. And they're light, and you can pack them anywhere. Later I'll show you my new yoga block purse idea, so that nobody should ever be without a yoga block. Okay, so something other than the yoga block, this is a yoga bolster, which is another name for a big, giant, thick pillow. And they are fantastic. There's so many different uses for them. So for a bolster, you could slide this back. But if your knees get much wider than your hips, I personally think that sitting for a long time like this becomes a little bit uncomfortable because the knees rotate in and the inner edges of my knees start to feel less comfort with it. So if I was going to sit on this, I would scoot it way back, and I would have my sit bones just barely on the edge of that. And for me, that would work. It's propping my hips up, it's taking a lot of that tightness in the hips and making it not much of an issue. You could also cross your legs with it and just prop your hips up a little bit. So again, it's basically just like a very large, thick, dense pillow that you could use. If you were to sit it the long way, it would be hard to cross your legs and get your feet to stick back or to sit on it this direction. So there's a number of props. There's a lot of different things that you can use. If you have a blanket, doesn't have to be a yoga blanket, you can fold that up and perform a lot of the same things. But remember, the real important part in this is to get your hips to relax enough that your spine can have that in and up curve at the base, so that the rounding of the ribs above it is more upright. When that low back loses its arch, the big heavy torso tends to follow the round of the rib cage, and it tends to just fall it down. And you can sit and meditate slouched. And if you sit and meditate for a long time, you probably will lose that ideal posture that you set up. But the more efficient this posture is, the easier it is to breathe, the more likely you stay awake, and that your mind, even though it's hopefully relaxed, is very alert. It's very vibrant. It might not be very occupied, but we would like it to be very vibrant, have the capacity to be very lively. And that way, if you ever move on to something where you sit for a long period of time, you're not disturbed by your own body posture. All right, there's a little bit on how to take a seat and also how to make a mess out of your meditation space. All right, I will see you soon, and yeah, good meditating to you.